One betrayal, one destroyed life. That's all it took to create the 6 most horrifying revenge stories ever recorded. These aren't random acts of violence. They're methodically planned executions where victims became architects of their own destruction. It was February 14th, 2017, when Cameron Doyle's manipulative nature finally caught up with her in the most horrific way imaginable. The 29-year-old wedding photographer had built her reputation on capturing perfect moments, but behind the lens lurked a woman who thrived on destroying the very love she pretended to celebrate. Cameron specialized in high-end weddings along California's coast, using her access to intimate moments to gather compromising information about her clients. Her calculating personality and sharp eye for human weakness made her a master blackmailer. She would photograph guests in compromising positions, capture private conversations, and fabricate evidence when reality didn't serve her purposes. Jake Johnson had been one of her victims. The 32-year-old landscape architect hired Cameron to photograph his engagement party 8 months earlier, never suspecting she would use doctored images to convince his fiancée that he was cheating. The lies destroyed everything Blake held dear: his relationship, his unborn child, and his faith in humanity. While Cameron celebrated another successful manipulation, Blake's world crumbled. His fiancée left, taking their baby, and Blake spiraled into depression and unemployment. But grief transformed into something darker as he began planning his revenge. Cameron maintained a Valentine's Day tradition of visiting Mendocino's cliffside rose garden alone, photographing herself with a single red rose against the sunset. She posted about this ritual extensively on social media, never realizing she was providing Blake with the perfect opportunity. The garden perched 300 feet above jagged rocks and crashing Pacific waves. Blake knew Cameron would arrive at 5:30 p.m., just as she had every February 14th for the past 5 years. He waited in the maze of pathways, watching as she posed with her rose near the cliff's edge. When Blake emerged from the shadows, Cameron initially didn't recognize the broken man whose life she had destroyed. He calmly explained who he was and what her lies had cost him. Cameron's arrogant dismissal quickly turned to panic as she realized the danger. She attempted to flee toward the garden entrance, but Blake blocked her path. During the violent struggle, Cameron dropped her rose as Blake grabbed her wrist. In a moment of pure rage, he shoved her backward with both hands. Cameron stepped back, and the loose soil at the cliff's edge crumbled beneath her feet. She plunged the full 300 feet down the rocky cliff face, her body striking multiple granite outcroppings before crashing onto the rocks below. The devastating impact shattered her ribs and fractured her skull, killing her instantly. Hours later, rescuers found her broken body on the rocks, the red rose lying beside her in the debris. The scene initially appeared to be an accidental fall during a photography session. However, investigators eventually uncovered Jake's connection to Cameron and evidence of premeditation. The case revealed the dark side of Cameron's photography business and the lives she had destroyed through her manipulations. Jake was arrested for first-degree murder, though he maintained that justice had finally been served for all of Cameron's victims. The investigation uncovered at least 12 other couples whose relationships Cameron had deliberately sabotaged for her own twisted entertainment and financial gain. It was August 15th, 2018, when Renee Callister's childhood cruelty finally caught up with her. The 31-year-old marketing executive had built a successful career, but her polished exterior concealed the heart of a vicious bully who had never faced consequences for the psychological torture she inflicted on vulnerable children. Renee possessed a narcissistic personality that made her incapable of genuine empathy. Even as an adult, she viewed others as objects for her entertainment, dismissing the pain she caused with casual indifference. Her social media showcased a perfect life, filled with luxury vacations and designer clothes, funded by her ruthless corporate tactics. 20 years earlier, at Camp Wildwood, Renee had been the ringleader of systematic abuse against Jordan Whitaker. The shy 12-year-old became her favorite target, enduring daily humiliation that included being forced to eat garbage, having his belongings destroyed, and being locked in storage closets for hours. Renee's cruelty drove Jordan to write a suicide note, though he never followed through. Jordan Whitaker, now 33, had spent decades in therapy recovering from the trauma Renee inflicted. The former victim worked as a property caretaker for the county, which gave him access to the abandoned Camp Wildwood. While Renee thrived in her corporate world, Jordan struggled with depression and anxiety that stemmed directly from her childhood torture. The camp had been closed for 15 years, its buildings slowly rotting in the wilderness. Jordan maintained the property, walking daily through the locations where his innocence had been destroyed. He kept his childhood suicide note as a reminder of how close Renee had pushed him to the edge. Renee's Instagram posts revealed her plan to visit the old camp for a nostalgic photo shoot. She wanted to recreate childhood memories for her lifestyle blog, completely oblivious to the pain those memories represented. Jordan saw this as divine justice finally presenting itself after 2 decades of waiting. On that August afternoon, Renee arrived alone at 2 p.m., her expensive camera equipment contrasting sharply with the decaying surroundings. She posed cheerfully in locations where she had once tormented children, treating the abandoned camp like a backdrop for social media content. Jordan emerged from the old dining hall, carrying his childhood suicide note. When he confronted her with the evidence of what her cruelty had nearly caused, Renee's reaction was everything Jordan expected. She laughed, dismissing their childhood interactions as harmless fun while showing zero remorse. Her complete lack of remorse triggered something primal in Jordan. 20 years of suppressed rage exploded as he chased her through the rotting camp buildings toward the old rope course, where she had once pushed him off platforms and cut his safety ropes for entertainment. Renee became entangled in deteriorated rope obstacles 30 feet above the ground. The equipment was now a death trap of frayed cables and rotting wood. Jordan stood below, watching as Renee begged for help, while he recited every cruel thing she had done to him and other vulnerable children. The rope finally snapped. Renee plummeted 30 feet onto broken wooden posts that had once supported camp signs. One pierced through her abdomen while another fractured her spine, paralyzing her instantly. She remained conscious for only minutes, experiencing a brief but intense moment of helplessness she had once inflicted on others, before succumbing to massive blood loss. Jordan left her body at the camp and reported finding her the next day during his routine inspection. The investigation initially supported accidental death, but Jordan's connection to Renee eventually led to his arrest for murder. It was March 22, 2016, when Blake Thornton's reckless disregard for human life finally led to his own violent death on a dark Tennessee highway. The 28-year-old came from a wealthy family whose connections had repeatedly saved him from facing real consequences for his dangerous behavior. Blake worked as a trust fund manager at his family's investment firm. His privileged upbringing had created an arrogant personality that viewed rules as suggestions for lesser people. He treated his multiple DUI arrests as minor inconveniences. Exactly 1 year earlier, Blake had been driving drunk when he struck and killed 6-year-old Emma Lowell in a crosswalk outside her elementary school. The little girl was walking home when Blake's speeding BMW sent her small body flying 30 feet through the air. He fled the scene immediately. Trina Lowell, Emma's 34-year-old mother, watched her only child take her final breath in the hospital that night. The single mother had devoted her entire life to raising Emma. Blake's wealthy family hired expensive lawyers who got him probation, claiming the child had darted into traffic. The injustice consumed Trina completely. She quit her job as a dental hygienist and spent the entire year studying Blake's patterns. She learned he visited Murphy's Tavern every Tuesday night, always leaving around 11:30 p.m. completely intoxicated. His route home took him down Highway 67, a winding mountain road. Trina spent months obsessing over revenge. Online forums and repair manuals taught her how cars worked, and she practiced on junkyard wrecks until her hands moved with mechanical precision. For weeks, Trina followed Blake to Murphy's Tavern parking lot, waiting until he was inside drinking before sliding beneath his silver BMW. She studied every inch of the undercarriage, rehearsing exactly where and how to strike. That fatal Tuesday night, while Blake was inside bragging about beating another DUI charge, Trina made her move. She slipped behind the front wheel well and severed the brake line with one precise cut, deep enough to ensure total failure but hidden well enough to pass a casual glance. At 11:30 p.m., Blake stumbled to his car, completely unaware that his vehicle had just been transformed into a death trap by a grieving mother seeking justice. At mile marker 23, Blake approached the sharp curve where he had previously crashed without consequence. This time, when he pressed the brake pedal, it sank uselessly to the floor. The severed brake line left him with no stopping power, and the BMW carried its full speed straight toward the guardrail at 55 miles per hour. Blake yanked the wheel desperately, but the heavy car barely responded. With no way to slow down, the vehicle plowed through the metal guardrail and became airborne over the 150-foot embankment. For 3 terrifying seconds, Blake experienced the same helplessness his victim had felt. The BMW flipped 3 times down the rocky slope. Blake's body was thrown violently around the interior as windows exploded and the roof collapsed. During the second flip, his neck snapped against the door frame, instantly paralyzing him. Blake remained conscious but unable to move as gasoline leaked from the ruptured fuel tank. Broken glass had shredded his face and arms, while twisted metal pinned his legs. He could smell the gas fumes growing stronger. Blake lay trapped and paralyzed, his broken neck and massive internal injuries stealing his strength within minutes. In those final moments, he finally understood the terror his victim had experienced. He slipped into unconsciousness from blood loss before death claimed him. Trina had been visiting Emma's grave during the crash, establishing a perfect alibi. The investigation initially ruled it another drunk driving accident. However, forensic analysis eventually revealed the mechanical sabotage, leading investigators to Trina. It was December 8, 2019, when Sabrina Lowell's home-wrecking affair finally led to her death in the most brutal way imaginable. The 29-year-old real estate agent had built her career on charm and manipulation, but her greatest conquest would become her downfall when she targeted the wrong family. Sabrina possessed a narcissistic personality that thrived on stealing what belonged to others. She specialized in targeting married men, viewing their wives as obstacles rather than human beings with feelings. Her stunning looks and calculated seduction techniques had ended dozens of marriages without any remorse for the destruction she caused. Sabrina had seduced David Anderson, a successful architect married to Kelly Anderson. She systematically targeted him during house showings, using her real estate expertise to create intimate situations. She convinced him that his wife didn't appreciate him, and that he deserved someone better who understood his ambitions. Kelly Anderson, 35, had been married to David for 12 years and was raising their twin daughters when Sabrina entered their lives like a predator. The devoted mother worked part-time as a bookkeeper to support David's career, never suspecting her husband was having an affair with their real estate agent. When David left his family, he drained their joint bank accounts and moved in with Sabrina, using their life savings. Kelly discovered the affair through credit card statements, showing expensive hotel stays and jewelry purchases. Watching her 8-year-old daughters cry themselves to sleep, asking why daddy didn't love them, transformed her grief into murderous rage. Sabrina flaunted the relationship on social media, posting photos of expensive vacations and designer gifts that David bought with his family's money. She showed no remorse for destroying a marriage, and seemed to enjoy the power she held over both David and his abandoned family. The Fontainebleau Hotel in Miami had been their regular meeting place during the affair. Sabrina booked the same penthouse suite monthly, creating a romantic sanctuary where she had systematically stolen another woman's husband. Kelly learned about these getaways through private investigator reports and credit card records. On that December evening, Kelly intercepted David's phone and sent Sabrina a text asking her to meet at their usual suite. Sabrina arrived at 7 p.m. expecting a romantic evening, completely unaware that the betrayed wife had been planning this confrontation for months. Kelly was waiting when Sabrina entered with champagne and lingerie, clearly expecting to celebrate another successful manipulation. The confrontation began with Kelly calmly explaining how Sabrina's affair had destroyed her family and left her children traumatized by their father's abandonment. Sabrina showed no remorse and bragged about stealing David, claiming Kelly had been a boring wife who didn't deserve him. She laughed about the children's tears and suggested Kelly should be grateful for being freed from an unhappy marriage. The complete lack of empathy triggered something primal in Kelly. She struck Sabrina with the champagne bottle, causing her to fall and hit her head on the marble coffee table. The blow caused a severe concussion, leaving Sabrina disoriented and unable to defend herself properly. Kelly dragged the dazed Sabrina to the suite's balcony on the 20th floor, overlooking Miami's glittering skyline. She forced her against the balcony railing, gripping her shoulders tightly. Sabrina's head cleared enough to realize the danger. She struggled desperately, clawing at Kelly's hands while pleading for mercy. But Kelly was stronger, fueled by months of rage over every cruel thing Sabrina had said about the children. With one final violent shove, Kelly pushed her over the railing and let gravity do the rest. Sabrina plummeted through the night air, her screams ending when her body struck the pavement 200 feet below. Kelly cleaned the suite and escaped through the service elevator. Security initially believed Sabrina had jumped due to relationship problems. However, the investigation eventually uncovered Kelly's connection and evidence of the confrontation, leading to her arrest. It was November 3, 2015, when Jordan Whitaker's arrogant disregard for patient safety finally caught up with him. The 45-year-old cardiac surgeon had built his reputation on performing unnecessary operations for profit, but his greed would lead to his own death. Jordan possessed an ego that matched his surgical skills, viewing patients as sources of income rather than human beings. His arrogant personality made him believe he was untouchable. He routinely ignored proper procedures and took dangerous shortcuts to maximize profits. 6 months earlier, Jordan had performed a completely unnecessary cardiac procedure on Robert Anderson, a 62-year-old retired teacher who came in for routine chest pain. Despite clear evidence that medication would resolve the issue, Jordan convinced the family that immediate surgery was required. During the operation, Jordan's reckless techniques led to massive complications. Robert suffered a stroke on the operating table due to Jordan's negligent surgical methods. When Robert died 3 days later, Jordan falsified medical records to blame pre-existing conditions. Gina Anderson, Robert's 38-year-old daughter and a surgical nurse at St. Mary's Hospital, knew her father had been healthy before Jordan's unnecessary surgery. She had worked alongside Jordan for years, witnessing his dangerous practices. Her father's death transformed her grief into calculated desire for justice. Working in the same hospital gave Gina intimate knowledge of surgical procedures, medication protocols, and Jordan's personal habits. She discovered that Jordan scheduled his own routine medical procedures during off hours to avoid scrutiny from colleagues. Jordan had scheduled a private gallbladder surgery for himself, using his influence to demand it be done late at night when the hospital was nearly empty. He didn't want colleagues gossiping about his health, and his arrogance made him believe he could bend rules without consequence. At 10 p.m., he arrived for the operation, trusting Gina to prepare his anesthesia while the skeleton night crew handled other emergencies. His supreme arrogance prevented him from suspecting that the nurse whose father he had killed might seek revenge. Gina had spent months planning the perfect murder. She replaced Jordan's standard anesthesia with a lethal combination of potassium chloride and succinylcholine. The potassium would stop his heart, while the paralytic agent would prevent him from calling for help. As Jordan lay on the operating table, the anesthesiologist injected what he believed was routine pre-operative sedation. But Gina had already swapped the medication, replacing it with the lethal mix. The potassium chloride immediately began disrupting Jordan's cardiac rhythm, while the succinylcholine paralyzed his respiratory muscles, leaving him unable to breathe or call for help. Within 90 seconds, Jordan experienced complete cardiac arrest, but remained fully conscious due to the paralytic agent preventing him from speaking or moving. His brain continued functioning for approximately 4 minutes while his body was completely paralyzed. He experienced the absolute terror of conscious death, unable to move, speak, or breathe as his organs systematically shut down. His eyes remained open and aware until his brain succumbed to oxygen deprivation. Jordan, who had caused so many unnecessary deaths through his surgical arrogance, died experiencing the same helplessness his victims had felt. His body was discovered by the night shift supervisor 20 minutes later. Gina disposed of the evidence and reported finding Jordan's body during routine checks. The death was initially attributed to sudden cardiac arrest from work-related stress. However, routine toxicology reports eventually revealed the modified anesthesia cocktail. The investigation uncovered Gina's access to restricted medications and her motive. Security footage ultimately led to her arrest for premeditated murder. It was June 18, 2017, when Molly Anderson's financial predatory behavior finally led to her brutal death in an isolated Colorado mountain cabin. The 32-year-old financial advisor had built her career on stealing from the most vulnerable members of society, but her greed would cost her everything. Molly possessed a charming personality that masked her sociopathic tendencies and complete lack of empathy for elderly victims. She specialized in targeting seniors with dementia, using her credentials to gain trust before systematically draining their life savings. 3 months earlier, Molly had targeted 78-year-old Margaret Doyle, a retired librarian living in a modest nursing home. Using forged documents and Margaret's stolen identity, Molly transferred the elderly woman's entire retirement fund into offshore accounts, leaving her unable to pay for care. Camille Doyle, Margaret's 27-year-old granddaughter, discovered the theft when the nursing home called about unpaid bills. Camille worked as a retail manager and had been Margaret's only family since her parents died. Watching her beloved grandmother cry about losing her home transformed Camille's grief into murderous rage. Camille spent months tracking down the stolen money through bank records. Her investigation led her to Molly, who had already spent Margaret's life savings on luxury cars and expensive vacations. The complete lack of remorse Molly showed when confronted fueled Camille's desire for revenge. Molly owned a remote family cabin in the Colorado mountains, located 50 miles from the nearest town. She used this isolated retreat whenever authorities began investigating her financial crimes, believing the remote location provided perfect cover. Camille learned about the cabin through surveillance and social media posts. She noted that Molly retreated there whenever she felt threatened by law enforcement, always traveling alone with no security systems or neighbors for miles. On that June evening, Molly arrived at the cabin planning to lay low until her latest investigation cooled down. She had recently stolen from 3 more elderly victims and needed time for the heat to die down. Camille had been watching the cabin for weeks, learning Molly's routines and preparing for the perfect opportunity. She waited until Molly was settled inside before making her move, knowing no one would hear the screams in the isolated wilderness. Camille confronted Molly at the cabin, presenting detailed evidence of the theft and demanding the return of her grandmother's money. When Molly laughed and claimed the elderly woman was too senile to manage money anyway, Camille's rage exploded into violence. She attacked Molly with a fireplace poker, fracturing her skull and knocking her unconscious. Camille then tied the unconscious Molly to a chair in the cabin's basement and waited for her to regain consciousness before revealing her plan for prolonged torture. Over the next several hours, Camille systematically broke Molly's fingers and toes with a hammer while forcing her to watch videos of Margaret crying about losing her home. She wanted Molly to understand the pain she had caused to innocent people. Camille used a knife to slowly carve dollar signs into Molly's arms and chest, symbolizing the money she had stolen from vulnerable seniors. Each cut was deliberate and calculated to maximize pain while keeping Molly conscious as long as possible. Molly finally died from shock and blood loss after hours of systematic torture. Her body bore evidence of Camille's methodical revenge, with dozens of cuts spelling out the word thief across her torso. Camille set fire to the cabin with Molly's body still inside, believing the flames would erase every trace of her revenge. She drove back to the city, confident that investigators would find nothing more than an accidental fire. However, forensic experts later discovered fractures in the charred remains that pointed to violent assault before death. Combined with financial records linking Camille to Molly and evidence of premeditation, the investigation built a solid case. The death was reclassified from accidental to homicide, leading to Camille's arrest for first-degree murder. If you found these endings as disturbing as we did, our next video explores even more unbelievable last moments that defy explanation.